Hello and welcome back to FATBOSS TV. Today we're looking at the second boss in the Eternal Palace raid, the highly anticipated underwater boss, which is the Blackwater Behemoth.
This encounter has you fighting the boss on a platform for a while, dealing with some pretty simple abilities. After so long, it will slither away to another platform far from the raid. You need to chase it down and interrupt its cast that will otherwise one-shot you. Now before the fight begins, you want to interact with the oxygen-rich membrane. This will give you a permanent buff which stops you from losing breath and gives you a 100% increased swim speed. This makes the fight actually doable and the bad parts of underwater fighting much more bearable.
Now throughout the fight you'll have a permanent debuff which reduces all incoming healing by 100%. The only way of removing this is by gaining bioluminescence. On each of the boss's platforms you'll find 2 pufferfish, and when you kill them it will spawn a cloud. When you move into a cloud you'll gain a buff which allows you to be healed for its 45-second duration. You'll be on each platform for around a minute and a half, so you'll want to kill one pufferfish straight away to gain the buff, and then kill the other just as your debuff drops. This will allow you to be healed for the entire time that you're on a platform. Staying in the confines of the platform is very important. If you have the bioluminescence buff whilst above open waters, you'll gain a new 5-second debuff. And if you don't leave the open waters, you'll be one-shot as a deep sea lurking monster will shoot out from underneath you. Now tanks, you don't actually need the pufferfish to gain the bioluminescence buff, as the boss will apply a 15-second debuff which essentially does the exact same thing. Tanks do still need to swap on the boss because he does gain a stacking attack speed buff, which only resets when the boss starts hitting a new target. We did this every 15 seconds or so. Whilst tanking the boss, it's vital that you stay within melee range at all times. The moment that you leave melee range, he's going to start hitting other people, or he's just going to do massive raid-wide damage.
Now moving on to some of the stuff the boss does to the raid. Aside from occasionally sending out some dots on players with its toxic spine attack, which simply just needs to be out-healed, the boss will cast Shock Pulse. This cast will push all players away from the boss over its cast, and at the end it will deal a burst of damage to the entire raid. Now the further from the boss you are when this cast ends, the less damage you take. So you want to be reasonably far from the boss when the cast ends, but you want to make sure you stay on the platform, as otherwise a fish will come and eat you, and tanks, just make sure you get back to the boss nice and quickly. Now the last ability the boss will cast whilst on the platform wasn't actually active when we last tested the boss. This is the boss's bioelectric feelers. Every 4 seconds the boss will do a scan of the raid. If it finds any players within 5 yards of one another, it will shock those players for 50k. This damage doesn't seem to ramp up with the amount of players in the clump, but 50k damage per 4 seconds on the entire raid seems like something that you'll want to avoid. This will force you to spread 5 yards apart from each other, something that might be difficult if you don't take the vertical space into account. Now how this interferes with players picking up the pufferfish cloud is somewhat unknown, but it's safe to say that you'll either all want to pick it up at once and just take a few hits on the raid, something that could probably easily be countered by cooldowns, or you want to pick up the buff in a staggered way, reducing the amount of people hit by their bioelectric feelers. Just do make sure that you pick up the buff before it despawns. Alternatively, this ability might just be up for certain periods of time, meaning that you'll want to get the buff whilst the boss isn't scanning for players. We just don't know at the moment. Either way, once you've fought the boss for so long and it has gained 100 energy, it will slither away to a platform far from the group and begin to cast Cavitation. If this cast does go through, it will deal 370k damage to the group every 2 seconds, so you need to get to it and interrupt this before it wipes you. So you will need to travel through open water, which will kill you after 5 seconds if you have that bioluminescence buff, so you need to make sure that is dropped before you start swimming across. Towards the back of the platform, slipstreams have formed. Moving into one of these will give you an 11-second buff, which increases your movement speed whilst forcing your character forward. You need to navigate towards the boss whilst avoiding jellyfish that are scattered along the route, as touching one will give you bioluminescence, attracting the one-shot fishes. Once we reached the new platform, we waited for everyone to arrive before interrupting the boss. And the fight largely repeats from here. You just gain a pufferfish buff at the start, deal with the boss's abilities, gain another pufferfish buff 45 seconds later, deal with the boss's abilities, and then swim to the last platform. The main change between the platforms is that there are now gaps in them that count as open water. You need to make sure that you're not pushed into or otherwise swim into these areas for too long, otherwise you will be eaten whole. But largely, that's it for this fight, so what do we think?
So when we first tested this boss on Heroic, it was an absolute mess. You were moving super slow because they hadn't put the swim speed increase in. The transition with the jellyfish, there was hardly any of them, so you didn't even really need to avoid them. You could just swim directly to the platform. Also, the boss was doing a crazy amount of raid-wide damage. So we actually ended that test early. I think we killed it. I can't even remember. I just mentally blocked it because we hated it that much. However, moving into Mythic, with the swim speed increase, with the transition actually having jellyfish to dodge, it feels like a much better fight, and it's nowhere near as bad as we initially thought. The only thing I would say, though, is that have they been a little bit tame? They've definitely got the underwater theme down because, well, you're underwater, there's fish that will jump out and eat you.
It's so cool.
So they got the theme down. But mechanically, did they play really safe here? Could they have done more things that are sort of surround the whole idea of being underwater? Of course, you need to be a little bit careful. They made it so, there's mechanics where you start to suffocate. You're physically running out of breath. There's so many ways you could cheese it. You just stack druids, they go in aquatic form. Undeads, they have slightly longer time in which they can breathe in. I think that's still a thing. There's potions that allow you to breathe underwater.
There's even buffs from warlocks as an example.
Exactly, yeah. So, they are limited somewhat. I don't even know what I would personally add. I just feel like they could have done something more that somehow worked with the idea of being underwater. And even if they didn't do that, I think just the general mechanics as they have now, of course we didn't get the opportunity to see the feelers, but could they have added more mechanics, especially as the fight goes on? Because as you move from one platform to another, it's essentially the exact same thing, except the platform is slightly smaller, or it has gaps in it, which makes things, such as the pushback, it makes it a little bit more difficult, which is kind of cool. But could they have added something else? Could there be megalodons coming out the wall and chomping at your feet, applying dots to people or some shit like that?
Or one-shotting you in that
or
case.
one-shotting
If there's
you,
a megalodon chomping at your feet, that is a one-shot mechanic.
You get what I'm saying, right?
I do get what you're saying. There isn't really much use, as you said, apart from being spread out. And if your raid side is small enough, you don't even need to go up. You could still be 5 yards spread in a 10-man group easily. Probably even a 30-man group if you really wanted to. If you're like, yeah, fuck you, Blizzard, I'm not going to swim. You, in theory, could all be on the platform still. So it would be interesting. Maybe there are slipstreams that will try and push you off the platform if you're at certain heights. The whole idea of using vertical space. They could definitely do a lot more with that idea. But yeah, maybe they're just trying to play it safe. It is, as you said, kind of like their first underwater boss in a while. Maybe they're just...
It's the first underwater boss ever.
Well, yeah, I suppose. It might be one of the 5-man, a long ago that I've
can't
forgotten
remember
about.
one,
but
least.
with a raid boss, at least, it's the first proper underwater one. And maybe they were just trying to make something that worked, that looked kind of cool, because it does. But it is early in the instance. They probably didn't want to go overboard, and they were just like, let's just make this work. Let's just make it maybe a loot pinata boss, and just kind of look cool. And have they done that? Probably.
Yeah, I think they again, I don't want to take too much away from it. It is a good start, but I think they could have done so much more. I'm guessing it was technical limitations with the vertical access. That's all I can think.
Maybe, but they did do it on Alakir, which was in Cataclysm.
Okay.
But that's where we'll leave it today. Thank you very much for watching. If you want to keep up to date with information on this boss, if anything changes before release, or would just like a handy written guide, then do go check out our work over on Wowhead. A link for that can be found in the description below. And of course, a live updated guide for this boss will be uploaded to the channel in the first week of Heroic. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Catch you later.